Hello everybody and welcome to my YouTube channel. I want to apologize ahead of time for the state of my hair. Definitely not living its best life. My bangs kind of look like they were cut by a zombie, and honestly that was pretty much me when I cut my bangs. But anyway, today is going to be a video idea that I got from Paulina Beauty. Now, if you don't know Paulina Beauty, what are you doing? You should totally check her out if you're interested in makeup, colorful or otherwise. And she came up with this idea called colorful makeup palettes that I am not interested in trying. And I saw this video on her channel, I think a few weeks ago, and I was really intrigued by it because I am a color lover. You guys know that I'm obsessed with color. I love colorful shadows, and there are so many colorful palettes that you would think I'll be terribly interested in, but the truth is I'm just not. And I thought that it might be a little bit fun to talk about this in a video. So the first item that I want to talk about is the Viseart Editorial Brights palette. I believe that's the name of it. Of course, I'm so terribly uninformed. This is what it looks like, and of course I will have a screen grab of the palette on this side of the screen as well for your convenience. But this is just such like a yummy looking, super bright palette from the very well-renowned Viseart brand. Now, here's the thing with Viseart. I get that they're supposed to be a makeup artist brand. I get that, so that's why the packaging is in this like manner, but I don't understand the idea of paying $80 for this. Like $80 for packaging that looks like Wet n Wild drugstore packaging. I just don't get it. I really don't. Please explain it to me. Actually, don't, because I don't want to understand. Like I don't think that this is worth $80. So yeah, I'm not gonna be getting this. I don't really want to get this. Plus, like, if I'm being completely, totally honest, like these are all colorful shades that I already own in my collection. The only shade that I probably don't already own is that like light lime green color, and that's pretty much it. So like I don't think that I would really want to get this palette because this is just not really inspiring for me, and the fact that it is so very expensive and you're not really getting anything that in my opinion is worth $80, which is what you're spending on this palette, and it is so very expensive. So in my opinion, you're not really getting anything for your money when it comes to this palette. So I'm not going to be getting this myself. But moving on. Let's talk about this. This is, I don't know what this is. This is the NYX Swear By It eyeshadow palette. I saw this, and yeah, this is a super colorful palette. Basically, this is like an ocean of neutrals punctured by a few like splashes of color, and it's arranged in such a way to make you think that they have more colors in this palette than they actually have. You know what I mean? You probably don't, but like just this palette has so many shadows in it, and I'm okay with having a palette that has a lot of shades in it. I find that so long as you like the majority of the shades in that palette, if not all of them, then it's worth it, okay? But I can't necessarily think of any instance in which anyone was really obsessed with NYX eyeshadows, and I saw like a video or two featuring this palette, and I did not see people react to this palette in a favorable manner. I saw a lot of people comment on how it was very hit or miss, and I think that this is kind of like proof that I personally should stay away from like huge palettes such as these, because let's face it, if this is a drugstore brand and they're coming out with this like huge palette, it's probably not going to be a palette that has really good quality within it. And I don't really feel right spending money on a palette that looks like this, because not only is the color story not necessarily something that inspires me, but it's just also like I don't think that the quality is really there from what I can see. So this is a little bit, I guess, of a surprise to, I guess, many of you, because I was initially really interested in these palettes. These are the Violet Voss palettes. I believe that these are called the Vault Deja Vu much, but like this is a collection of palettes, and I was kind of like really interested in the fruit But this is a collection of palettes, and I was actually quite interested in the Fruit Sorbet palette. But I've kind of like just become very much uninterested in this collection. Like, this is not necessarily like a palette or a color story that inspires me. You know, like with color stories and palettes, I truly want or I wish to see colorful palettes that have a little bit more of an interesting color story. Like, if a brand can come out with an eyeshadow palette that has like 5 different shades of browns with varying tones, with varying undertones, what's stopping them from doing the same with colorful shadows? Like, why can't they come out with like a palette of blues and greens with varying undertones and varying like depths of color? Or why can't they do the same to a red palette? But instead we're seeing palettes such as these brands have just cherry picked colors for, and I don't really find that appealing. And I guess it sounds very like callous, but if this palette was sent to me in PR, like, I would use it, but like, would I buy it? No, I wouldn't. You know, like, I want to spend my money on things that actually really truly do inspire me. And unfortunately, like, just seeing this like very kind of similar color story over and over is just not very inspiring for me whatsoever. Okay, so another item that is a colorful palette that I'm just not into is the Nopp Poison Garden palette. Now, so many people have bought this palette, and I will admit that like even before we saw like all the negative reviews surrounding this palette, I wasn't necessarily intrigued by it, mostly because I just didn't really like how the packaging was so like Poison Garden-esque, and then the interior eyeshadows were just like kind of like bleh, you know, like it wasn't necessarily the kind of palette that I wanted, because I looked at the exterior packaging and I was like, oh wow, this is gonna be like a really dark palette with like really rich tones. And with this palette, like, all we saw that was really quite interesting were that like really bright magenta in like the top row, also maybe like that purple in the center row, and then like that blue, you know. And I want more from a palette that calls itself Poison Garden, you know. Like, I want something interesting, and I don't really look at this and get inspired, because I'm honestly looking at the exterior packaging and I kind of felt let down, because I don't really think of this as a colorful palette that I necessarily want to get. And also, like, add on to that the negative reviews that have been surrounding this palette, and naturally I do not want to get it myself. This is a holiday palette from Lorac. They have like this entire like theme that includes naming a whole bunch of palettes, like Pro palettes. Like, they have their Lorac Pro 1, Lorac Pro 2, 3, I believe they have a 4, and then they have like these holiday editions where they have a whole bunch of colors in a palette, and they call it the Mega Pro. I do admit that when I first was introduced to the idea of this Mega Pro line, I was very intrigued. And see, now like I'm looking at this palette right here. This is the latest installment of their Mega Pro series, and I'm like, this is just boring. This is honestly so boring. I don't get the idea of having several of those very light matte transition or brow bone highlights in one palette. Like, 1 is enough. 2, pushing it. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's way too much. No, okay. I really like what Angelica Nyqvist has been saying in a few of her videos, how it's kind of like a little bit weird that we always are talking about the need for diversity within foundation, within concealer ranges, and within face products, but we completely neglect to talk about the same issue when it comes to eyeshadows, and how so many brands release eyeshadow palettes with transition colors and brow bone highlight colors that are just very visibly catered towards lighter skin tones. And I do not really have a deep skin tone, so I can't really imagine how it is to do makeup on a deep skin tone, like on a deeper skin tone. So of course, like, I mean, my assumption is it would be a little bit difficult for me to do my makeup with this palette if I had a deeper skin tone, you know. So like, if you're going to include like a light color for a brow bone, like, or a light transition color or a light base color, just include several shades of that, because I don't see a need to include just the bare minimum to cover just a certain percentage of your customer base, you know? Like, I actually do want to show you this festival palette right here that I actually did use for some of my eyeshadows today. I really do love how they have included two options that would be amazing for brow bone highlight. They have this really super white highlight that is very frosty that I'm actually wearing on my cheeks today and on my brow bone, but then they have this option right here which would work, in my opinion, amazingly for a deeper skin tone. And if you're kind of in between the two, you can mix them, but I like this, you know. This I don't get. And also like the fact that these colors in general, I mean, these are like just the most basic of the basic colorful colors. There's nothing in this palette that sort of makes me go, ooh, this is interesting. Like, these are just the most mundane and boring shades. It's kind of like this is a little bit out there for a neutral lover, but at the same time this is way too tame for a colorful lover, and this is almost unusable for someone with deeper skin tones. I mean, that's just my opinion. If you think differently, please be sure to leave me your comment, let me know, and we'll have a little bit of a conversation in the comments down below, but that is just of course my opinion. This is another palette that is quite colorful that I'm just not too into. This is the Juvia's Place Afrique palette. I might get this at some point because there's certain colors in here that I do find myself drawn to, but currently I don't necessarily think of this palette as a palette that I do want to get myself. I do like the inclusion of the green, of the orange, the blue, and the yellow. Those are like the shades that are really like attractive to me, but I think that like so many of the colors in here are colors that I already own. See, here's the thing, like I have so many neutral palettes, so many that I'm actually giving them away. I want this to be a palette that has all, if not a vast majority of colorful shades, because otherwise it's just not worth it for me to get a palette like this, because I already have some of these shades and I just want to get a palette that is through and through colorful, that's not necessarily punctured by neutral tones that I already have or that I just find quite boring, because I think that everybody has a warm brown, everyone has a light transition color like this one, everyone has like that bronzy color. I kind of want something different. I have no idea if this is currently available or not, but I do still want to talk about this palette. This is a Kat Von D 10-year anniversary palette, and I have to admit that when this palette first came out, I was not necessarily interested in it whatsoever. And the reason for this is I think that so many of these colors are colors that I already own. And looking at this palette, I only see 3 colors that I'm altogether like quite intrigued by. That really bright red and the turquoise and the really deep blue at the far right. And those are the only 3 colors in this palette that catch my attention. And this is a palette that is comprised of many shades, and therefore I can't necessarily justify the idea of getting this palette for myself if I'm not satisfied with most of the colors in this palette, or if I'm not inspired by most of the colors in the palette. I feel like if this palette consisted of more like deeper tones, more out of the box tones, I would really be into this palette and I'd really like the looks of it. It's one of those palettes that's trying to be very colorful, but it's kind of not, because the colors that they're using are colors that every single person that loves color already has several versions of in their collection. So this is just a palette that for me doesn't really tick the boxes that I want it to tick. Like I don't really like it, and I don't really feel myself like inspired by it or motivated to get. Another palette that I want to talk about is the ColourPop Yes Please palette. Now, this is a palette that, I don't know, like it's kind of like neutral bordering on the edge of colorful. I mean, it's debatable whether or not this palette is a colorful palette in my mind. I just think that this palette is just not one that I necessarily find myself drawn to, and it's weird because I feel like everyone else loves this palette. I, however, do not. I'm just not into it. I just think that these colors are so very warm toned, and I, at this point, am not necessarily motivated to buy a palette that looks quite basic and that is comprised of very warm tone shades. I'm just not motivated to get my hands on it. I'm just not motivated to pay any amount of money for it, and I just feel like this is not a palette that inspires me or not a palette that motivates me to create like beautiful makeup looks. So, you know, it's not a palette that I necessarily want to add to my collection. I do love several shades in this palette. I do want to admit, like, there are some shades in this palette that I like. Love that yellow in the bottom corner. It looks so very pretty. But then the other colors, like, I'm looking at this palette and I'm thinking, realistically, would I use this palette? I can tell you, probably not. Then I also want to talk about the Urban Decay Born to Run palette. Now, this is a palette that got so much hype that everyone seems to be absolutely obsessed over their buttons for. I don't really like it. I don't really like the looks of it. I mean, I guess it's supposed to be like an all-around palette that you can use for travel, that's supposed to have everything that you need in there. I feel like this palette, just in general, it's not a palette that I really vibe with. I don't understand how it can be a Born to Run palette when it's so large. I mean, I can think of one time in my life that I carried a larger palette when I was traveling, and that was when I went to New York City, and that was honestly the first and the last time I will ever take a huge eyeshadow palette with me on any kind of traveling excursion, because I will be honest with you, I did not use that palette at all. Like, I didn't. And I just think that creating a palette just for travel, it's kind of weird, because you might as well give somebody a very small, very compact palette, you know, to travel in. Because yeah, I guess you could put this kind of palette in your carry-on, because then you can make sure it doesn't break. But I don't know about you, but when I'm getting on a plane, my carry-on is already heavy, because I already have my computer, I have my camera, I have my batteries, I have my passport, I have all these other necessities, and then I have this. Like, I don't want this in my carry-on. Like, so then I'd have to put it in my luggage, and I don't want to put it in my luggage because then it might break, because I can tell you it's not fun to lose your luggage, okay? And it's not fun to basically put valuable things in your luggage that may or may not break when they're being transported. So therefore, the idea of getting this palette doesn't work for me. I mean, most of these colors are not colors that I'd use anyway. I mean, I can't imagine using the top row at all. Like, I pretty much only use maybe the second color and that's it, maybe for highlight, and that's it. Then the bottom two rows maybe, but those are already colors that I already own. Like, I already have these colors, and I don't think that the way that they're presented in this palette is any way inspiring for me. Like, I mean, you guys know that I'm a stickler for a good color story, and this palette, like, it's just, the color story in here, it's not like cohesive in a way that inspires me. Like, I just think that these like colors are just jumbled up together, and it's kind of like a little bit overwhelming for me, because it's way too much. Like, I could probably use like that quad in the bottom left. I could definitely picture myself using that a lot, but then the other colors I'd kind of like be a little bit frazzled with, you know, like, I don't know. Maybe that's just me. Maybe I'm weird, but not interested. So yeah, those are pretty much all the palettes I want to talk about in today's video. I hope you enjoyed this one. Please check out Paulina's channel. I'll also feature some other creators that have done this video as well if you want to sort of like check their videos out. They're really fun to watch. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it entertaining, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye guys.